In 1850, French scientist Auguste Mariette went to Egypt looking for manuscripts, but accidentally found a head of a sphinx sticking out of the dunes. He cleared the sand and figured out the Sphinx was guiding the entrance to some underground construction. Several months later, he finally entered the Serapeum of Saqqara. Inside, he found an enormous granite sarcophagi with remnants of 64 bulls. Scientists are still amazed by the tech that the ancient Egyptians used to transport those enormous boxes. The Serapeum was built around the year 3000 before the Common Era. It was an underground tomb built to honor the sacred Apis bulls of ancient Egypt. It had a long hallway, almost 500 feet long, with giant stone rooms on both sides. Some of the sarcophagi weighed as much as 50 average cars, and all of them were made with super precision, with exact 90-degree angles. These sarcophagi were beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and carvings that told stories about the lives and importance of the Apis bulls. Now, there are 24 sarcophagi left. In ancient Egypt, Apis bulls were very special animals connected to the deity Ptah. They thought the bulls carried Ptah's spirit and wisdom, helped the pharaoh, and protected the Egyptians. Priests looked for special markings on young bulls to find Apis bulls. It could be a white triangle on its forehead, which symbolized divine light, a shape on its back like a vulture's wing, and a scarab shape under its tongue, which stood for rebirth. If a bull had these signs, they believed it was chosen by Ptah and treated it like royalty. The chosen bulls lived in a special temple in Memphis, the city where they worshipped Ptah. They received the best care and offerings from visitors who wanted their blessings. When an Apis bull passed away, it was treated with great honor and mummified. When Mariette entered the Serapeum, he noticed traces of rollers on the gallery's floor and found 2 wooden horizontal winches. Each had 8 levers. Later, other explorers saw double rails. The burial chambers were lower than the hallway floor. To get the boxes into place, workers filled the chambers with sand so the sarcophagi could be rolled in straight. Then they slowly removed the sand to gently lower the boxes into perfectly cut spaces in the bedrock. A carved stone sign found in the Serapeum said it took 28 days to move just one sarcophagus and its lid into its spot during the time of Ptolemy II. The extreme precision of the sarcophagi with 90-degree angles also has an explanation. Ancient Egyptians wrote texts, or rather, papyrus, on geometry a long time ago. It shows that they knew the approximate number pi and could calculate the volume of a pyramid with its top cut off. If they could figure out complicated math like that back then, it makes sense that they could also carve perfectly flat surfaces 500 years later. All this sounds pretty legit, but some people think certain things don't add up here. The size of boxes is way larger than the size of bulls, yet they buried pharaohs in tiny coffins that barely fit their bodies. The sarcophagi are made out of granite with crazy precision, and they could have just used limestone, which would have made things way easier. The transportation of the boxes seems pretty simple, but only in theory. If one person could pull about 440 pounds, then at least 250 people would be needed to pull just one box. The tunnels in the Serapeum are really narrow, only about 2 feet wider than the boxes themselves. There's no way hundreds of people could have squeezed into those tight spaces to pull the boxes. And even if they did, how would they turn the box in the cramped corridor, lower it into its niche, and place it perfectly in the middle? Somehow, they did this 24 times, and every box is centered perfectly. Plus, the chambers were dusty, and there were no signs of soot from lamps. This means they must have worked in almost complete darkness. The real use of the boxes could also be different. A long time ago, even before the Egyptian pharaohs ruled, the local people already knew how to use fermentation. It happens when tiny organisms called yeast eat certain ingredients like starch and turn them into gas and ethanol. So someone in ancient Egypt probably put food like barley, bread, and even meat inside a giant stone box, then closed it tight with a heavy lid. These stone boxes, carved from granite, were so precisely made that they were almost completely sealed. so nothing could escape from it. As the yeast inside the box started working, it created more and more CO2 gas. It built up pressure inside the box. The granite boxes were incredibly strong. They could handle more pressure than a car tire can hold. When granite was squeezed under such pressure, its crystals produced a tiny electric charge. This effect was possible because granite contains quartz, a material that reacts to pressure this way. The process also needed meat or animal parts, possibly to help the yeast grow better. Meat contains something called oleic acid, which yeast needs to keep growing and to survive the bad effects of the ethanol it produces. As the pressure inside the box kept growing, the combination of gases and electricity made these boxes not just ancient fridges, but powerful energy systems. Over time, the pressure inside got so strong that it could push the lid open and the gas would escape with a pop. But when people rediscovered the Serapeum in 1850, they found old drawings that showed piles of stones stacked on top of some of the box lids. So, someone long ago probably tried to make the lids even heavier by adding extra weight to make it harder for the gas pressure to push them open. This extra weight also meant the quartz crystals in the granite could keep creating more electricity under all that pressure. If someone opened one of these stone boxes thousands of years later, they would only find bones from bulls that were placed in the box. And that's exactly what Mariette discovered in the 1850s. They opened the Serapeum for visitors soon after the first excavations in the second half of the 19th century. Prince of Wales even had a luncheon with his guests in one of the sarcophagi. Sands and earthquakes made the site inaccessible for a while, but now you can visit it again and try to solve the mystery yourself. With new tech, we could have answers to many other historical mysteries soon. A team of scientists at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History recently used a special CT scanner to learn more about ancient Egyptian mummies without unwrapping them. They gently rolled 26 mummies on custom carts out to the parking lot, where the scanner was waiting. It took thousands of detailed X-ray pictures of each mummy and their coffins. When all the pictures were put together, they created 3D images that showed what was inside, the skeletons, and some artifacts. The scientists hope these images will help them understand ancient Egyptian burial practices from over 3,000 years ago. Even though the scanning process only took 4 days, it might take 3 years to study all the data. But scientists were able to learn some personal details about the mummies. One of the most popular mummified individuals at the museum, Lady Chineta, was a woman who lived in ancient Egypt about 3,000 years ago. It looks like she passed away in her late 30s or early 40s. To make sure her body looked complete for the afterlife, embalmers put stuffing in her neck to keep it from collapsing. They also placed artificial eyes in her sockets, so she would have eyes in the next world. She was wrapped in fancy linen and placed in a beautifully decorated coffin. The scans revealed that it had been carefully crafted with a slit at the back, which embalmers used to fit the body. There were also some artistic details on the surface, like markings for her knees. It looks like her burial was on the scale of a high-end luxury car.
Secant cosine tangent sine 3.14159. Yeah, that was the cheer we heard coming from the trigonometry club back in the day. For the rest of us in math class, terms such as sine, tangent, and pi were just bewildering. Who invented these and why? Was their only purpose to make it harder for students? Well, not quite. Trigonometry was invented by the ancient Egyptians. They needed this knowledge to construct pyramids, and they did a pretty good job too. The Great Pyramid in Giza still stands today, some 4,500 years after it was built. No recalls either. So let's get out of that classroom and on a journey through time to reveal the secrets behind the ancient Egyptians' precision. Here you are, standing on the Great Pyramid's construction site, some 9 miles from Cairo. Well, the city still isn't there, as you're surrounded only by the desert and teams of construction workers. They're transporting large stone blocks weighing 2.5 tons each. They're inside a wooden sled that sits on large rollers. A crew of 8 men rolls these blocks along the ground. You immediately think of the rollers on a supermarket cash register. The principle is exactly the same, but the scale is greater, much greater. Scientists estimate that the Egyptians used 2.3 million such blocks in the Great Pyramid alone. And the block in front of you is one of the lighter ones. The heaviest of them weighed up to 15 tons. But where did all these blocks come from? Most of them originated from quarries around Giza. It's not that impressive, you think, but wait until you hear how ancient engineers transported the granite used in construction over 500 miles to the pyramid. There were no railways or highways back then, but the mighty Nile was always there. Researchers even believe that the Egyptians dug a canal to connect the Nile directly to the pyramid's construction site. All they had to do then was to wait for the flood season to begin, and voila! The rising water levels floated the heavy stone blocks for them. But how did they lift the enormous stones on dry land to stack them up to the top? Did they use oversized cranes? Well, ancient Egyptians worked around this problem, literally speaking. One of the workers is now pointing to the giant ramp going around the pyramid they're building. This is how a mountain road zigzags its way to the top. If the ramp went directly to the top of the pyramid, then workers couldn't pull the stone blocks along it. It would be too steep. Scientists have calculated that 8% could be the maximum incline. So ancient Egyptians just extended the ramp around the pyramid. Again, these are all theories, as the ramp could have been inside the pyramid, as some researchers suggest. The exact building method is still a mystery, guarded by the Sphinx. That's its real name, right? Wrong. As the Great Sphinx is just the statue's alias. You know, the name writers take when they want to hide their true identity, or a singer's stage name. The Sphinx's real name, translated from Egyptian, means Horus in the horizon. That was the name for the Egyptian deity of the sky. The trail of mystery doesn't end there. As a man walks past you with a bucket of paint, he's going to add a touch of color to the Great Sphinx. Researchers found specks of this red color next to its ear. That was some strong paint, as it survived for thousands of years. You are now standing straight in front of the Sphinx. You look up. It's very tall, right? 66 feet to be precise. Now resist the urge to take a selfie. You can do it. Now you notice something else. It looks like the Sphinx is in the center of a giant triangle in the back. That's one side of the Great Pyramid. And no, your eyes are not playing tricks on you. The Sphinx really does sit in the center of the pyramid's lateral face. Here's where math comes in handy. A pyramid has 4 sides, called lateral faces. There's also a 5th face, the base, but that's not visible. It's, wait for it, face down. The Sphinx has one last mystery to reveal: its age. Scientists agree that Pharaoh Khafre built the Sphinx. He ruled after his father, who had built a great pyramid nearby. So both structures were finished around the same time. Let's talk about numbers again. You've heard of Cleopatra, the Egyptian princess described as a woman of great beauty.
Hello?
She saw the pyramids, but she lived closer to the time of the first iPhone than the time of the people who built the pyramids. Fascinating, right? You can see thousands of people around you. They're working hard to build the pharaoh's tomb. But how many of them are there exactly? One Greek philosopher estimated there were as many as 100,000 workers. Seems like an okay number for such an enormous structure, but it can't be true. Science simply can't back up this number. Egyptologists put the total number of workers at 30,000. And yes, Indiana Jones was one of them, at least on the big screen, but he showed up late. Egyptologists know a lot about the pyramids, but not everything. Not because they don't want to, but because they haven't yet dug up enough evidence. They can only guess how the building process went. First, engineers would arrive to choose the right spot and do the necessary measurements. That's why they needed all that complicated math. Then, it's time for sourcing the material, the large stone blocks I mentioned earlier. When boats deliver them to the site of the future pyramid, workers can finally do their thing. They operated in smaller groups, but there were at least 2,000 of them chiseling and carving away at any given time. Sounds like a typical construction site today? Well, that's because it is, just thousands of years ago. It's amazing what ancient Egyptians were able to achieve with just copper and stone tools. The pyramid is now complete in front of you. But is it the same pyramid we see today? Why is this structure shining bright in the desert sun? Isn't it supposed to be a dusty yellow color? Well, no. Human activity and the elements have completely stripped the outer layer of stones over time. Expert craftspeople polished these blocks using nothing but stone and sand. The end result was a smooth and shiny rock. On the day it was completed, the Great Pyramid of Giza was a perfect triangle of light. Its polished sides acted like giant mirrors, reflecting the powerful Egyptian sun. This is the point where you should put your glasses on, and that shiny thing you see at the pyramid's very top is actually gold. The capstone at the top of the pyramid is called a pyramidion. It was covered in sheets of gold. As you can guess, these were the first stones to disappear. Let's make another stop before we get you back to your classroom. We travel to the British Isles, and no, Stonehenge isn't our destination. It is Newgrange in County Meath. Scientists estimate that the ancient peoples of Ireland built this stone monument around the year 3200 BCE. This makes it older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid in Giza. The function of the circular mound in Newgrange is the same as the one of the Great Pyramid and equally mysterious. The estimated amount of loose stone present in the valley is over 220,000 tons. And it's not just randomly thrown on a pile. The order in which the stones are set makes the structure water-resistant. That would explain how Newgrange had survived for so long. Kinda makes you want to splash out the cash for that waterproof phone case, huh? Well, you're back in your school desk, but today's math lecture is the last thing on your mind. You're thinking about how great the Egyptian pyramids are, and if we have something similar today. It turns out modern engineers are just as impressed with the Great Pyramid as you are. There's a glass pyramid sitting in the main courtyard of the famous Louvre Museum in Paris. The panorama of San Francisco wouldn't be complete without the 48-story Transamerica Pyramid. But Las Vegas went the furthest. There we find the Luxor Hotel. It's so big that it's the third largest pyramid on the planet. And guess what's in front of it? Yup, a replica of the Sphinx. It's 110 feet tall, 2 stories higher than the one in Giza. Yeah, everything's bigger in Vegas.
There's a huge stone obelisk that was supposed to be taller than a 10-story building, lying unfinished in the Egyptian desert. That's the obelisk of Aswan, and it looks like it was made using the same technique as Machu Picchu, thousands of miles away. The plan of its creators was to build the largest and heaviest single stone monument the Egyptians ever created. But something interrupted their plans. Over 3,500 years ago, workers began carving this obelisk directly from the solid granite bedrock. They had nothing but simple copper tools and wooden wedges. They had to be extremely precise because obelisks were important symbols of Pharaoh's power and their connection to the deities. The most common version is that Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's greatest rulers, ordered this enormous obelisk to be made. Though some experts think it may have been meant for Pharaoh Thutmose I. If it had been completed, it would have stood 137 feet tall and weighed nearly 1,200 tons, as heavy as 200 elephants. Its surface has smooth, hollowed-out sections that seem as if someone had dug out the granite, just like ice cream. Researchers called this effect scooping, but how it was done is still a mystery. It looks like the same scooping technique was used to build several megalithic sites in South America, where ancient builders shaped stones in a curved, hollowed-out way. But it is the only construction with such a surface in Egypt. You can see the scooped-out lines at the sides of the obelisk, and they continue down into the ground, following an almost perfect path along the bedrock. The workers first chipped away the rough shape and then used a clever trick. They hammered wooden wedges into cracks and soaked them with water to make the wood expand and split the stone. This method, combined with grinding tools made of harder stone, allowed them to shape the obelisk with incredible precision. But just when the workers were close to finishing, a huge crack appeared in the stone. There was no way to fix it, and instead of removing the broken stone, the Egyptians left the obelisk half buried in the ground. Perhaps they were afraid that a monument with a flaw would tarnish the reputation of the pharaoh and the builders. The obelisk has stayed there ever since, and its bottom side is still attached to the bedrock. It was discovered in the early 20th century after it had been covered by sand for thousands of years. And even in its unfinished condition, it is one of the most important archaeological finds in Egypt, as it has given scientists unusual valuable insights into ancient Egyptian stoneworking techniques. There's another large rock nearby. It's almost completely scooped out at its base, with only a tiny bit of granite still attached to the ground. It looks as if someone tried to separate it from the bedrock, but left it hanging by a thread. There's hardly room for one person to squeeze in and shape the rock in this way. So, perhaps ancient workers used tools or techniques we don't even know about. Another ancient Egyptian marvel is the Great Pyramid. All four sides of it are aligned with all four sides of the cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. According to archaeologist and engineer Glenn Dash, the alignment is accurate to within 1/15th of a degree. The architects managed to achieve this without modern tools like drones, blueprints, or computers. Many researchers tried to explain this construction miracle. One theory was that the builders used a pole star or the sun's shadow. But Dash recently proposed that the Egyptians might have used the autumnal equinox to align the pyramids. It happens twice a year when the Earth's equator passes through the center of the sun's disk, making day and night nearly equal in length. To test his theory, Dash conducted an experiment on the 22nd of September, 2016, the day of the fall equinox. He used a special rod to cast a shadow and tracked its tip at regular intervals to form a smooth curve. He connected 2 points of the curve with a taut string and created an almost perfect east-west line. On the equinox, the shadow's tip runs a straight line, nearly perfectly east-west, and with a slight counterclockwise error. There's a similar error in the pyramids. Although his experiment was conducted in Connecticut, Dash believed that the same method would work in Egypt. All the ancient Egyptians needed was a clear, sunny day. They could determine the fall equinox by counting 91 days from the summer solstice. But they left us a few clues, and no engineering documents or architectural plans have been found that explain their methods. So they might have mapped shadows, but we can't be sure. Some Roman bridges were built more than 2,000 years ago, but many of them are still standing, and some are even still in use today. The Romans needed bridges to move their powerful forces quickly across rivers and valleys. To do this, they trained special engineers and craftsmen who became experts in construction. These builders traveled all over the Roman Empire, shared their knowledge, and made sure every bridge was built the best way possible. One of the Romans' best ideas was using arches instead of flat beams. Arches spread out the weight of the bridge, making it much stronger and able to last longer. To solve the problem of building bridge supports in water, the Romans invented something called a cofferdam. First, they would hammer large wooden walls into the riverbed and seal the gaps with clay to keep water out. Then, they poured concrete inside the dry space they had created, forming a super strong base for the bridge. One famous bridge that used this trick is the Sant'Angelo Bridge in Rome. It was built more than 1,800 years ago, and it's still standing today over the Tiber River. Unfortunately, many of the Roman engineers' blueprints and records have been lost over time. A few ancient writers wrote about Roman construction methods, but they didn't record every detail. Today, scientists and historians have to study the bridges themselves to figure out how they were built. The problem is that even though many Roman bridges still stand today, they aren't always exactly as they were when they were first built. Some survived because they were made from extra strong materials. Others were carefully repaired and maintained over the centuries. Some bridges weren't used much, so they stayed in good shape simply because they didn't wear out. Even when modern engineers study these bridges, they know that some parts have been rebuilt or restored many times. Ancient amphitheaters had such great acoustics that modern scientists use computer programs and special sound simulations to figure out how it worked. Many of these open-air theaters are partially ruined, so experts recreate them in digital models to test how sound travels inside them. But some ancient theaters, like the famous theater of Epidaurus in Greece, are still so well preserved that scientists can measure the sound in real life. The acoustics there is so perfect that you can hear someone speaking on stage clearly, even from the very top row. The curved, bowl-like shape of the theater worked like a giant speaker that naturally amplified voices and music. The seats were placed at different heights and angles so that the sound waves moved smoothly through the theater. Hard materials like marble and stone were great at bouncing sound waves across the theater, so voices and music were louder and clearer. But too much echo would make words hard to understand, so ancient architects used soft materials like curtains, carpet, and even special awnings to absorb extra sound waves and keep the acoustics perfect. One of the largest and most famous Roman amphitheaters, the Colosseum in Rome, had a huge retractable awning that could be pulled across the top to block out the sun and also reduce excess echoes, making sure the audience could hear every word and sound without distortion. Where an amphitheater was built also helped with sound. Many ancient theaters were designed facing east to west, so during afternoon performances, the actors and musicians were bathed in natural sunlight.
Now picture a tomb locked for 1,400 years, and then, suddenly, poof, it's open. What could be inside? An ancient curse or exciting discoveries? Maybe the former, since a giant stone owl is guarding the entrance with the owl's beak clamping down on a human face like it's swallowing a soul. Now, it's not just a picture this situation. The discovery probably happened like this. The archaeologists were at a place called San Pablo Huizo in southern Mexico. At one point, they stumbled upon something that resembled an entrance. Ooh, where did it lead? They just had to figure it out. By that entrance, there was a large carved owl. Soon the researchers realized that it wasn't just decoration. The beak of the bird was open, and inside, there was the painted face of a man. Most likely, it was an important leader. For the people inhabiting that region, owls were linked to demise and power. So, it was like either the owl was guarding the spirit of the person buried there, or was it holding it captive? Was it even wise to sneak into that mysterious place? Well, the scientists' thirst for answers was more powerful than any fear. So they entered and found themselves inside a tomb. It was made up of two main parts, a front room, kind of like an entrance hall, and a deeper burial room. There was a doorway between these two rooms. It was covered in carvings. At the top, there was a stone beam with special symbols on it. Those symbols worked like names based on a person's birth date. On each side of the doorway, there were carvings of a man and a woman wearing detailed headdresses. The researchers thought they could have been placed there like guards, watching over the tomb. The walls were still painted in bright colors – white, green, red, and blue. It was an astonishing view, and the paintings actually told a story, showing a funeral procession. People were carrying bags of something called copal, which is basically a tree resin. The locals, called Zapotecs, burned it like incense during ceremonies, kind of like how people today often light candles or incense during special rituals. Besides, the archaeologists found carved symbols that work like a calendar. A bit later, the researchers found out that the tomb was about 1,400 years old. It came from the Zapotec civilization, and what made it so special was how well everything inside was still preserved. It was like opening a time capsule that hadn't been touched for over 1,000 years. Interestingly, they didn't just randomly find it. Officials started looking into the site after someone reported looting. When scientists checked it out, They realized they had stumbled onto one of the most important discoveries in Mexico in the last decade. The tomb dates back to around the year 600, when the Zapotec people were thriving in the area. They were sometimes called the Cloud People, and they built a powerful civilization long before the Spanish arrived. Even today, many people in Mexico still speak Zapotec languages. Right now, experts from the National Institute of Anthropology and History are working carefully to protect the tomb and study everything inside. They're looking at things like pottery, symbols, and even a few human bones they found there. One of the most exciting things about this discovery was that many other Zapotec tombs found in the region had already been looted before archaeologists got to them. That means we lost a lot of history. Luckily, this tomb was miraculously mostly intact. Now scientists are focusing on protecting the tomb. They're carefully controlling the air and humidity inside because even small changes can damage it, documenting the artwork, and studying the carvings and symbols. But ancient tombs aren't always hidden deep underground, like in adventure movies. Sometimes you can find them right under a busy city. In 2023, archaeologists made a bizarre discovery on the edge of Chapultepec Park in Mexico City. They found a group of graves that are about 3,500 years old, older than most ancient pyramids in Mexico. There were 10 tombs shaped a bit like upside-down bottles or bells, wide at the bottom and narrower at the top. About half of them had human remains inside, 4 women and 1 man, mostly young adults. These people likely lived in a large village in the area during the early and middle pre-classic periods. That's long before the Aztecs ever existed. One of the archaeologists explained that people had been living in that whole area before a volcano had changed everything. That volcano is the Chitala volcano, and when it erupted, it basically buried parts of the landscape under lava. Because of that, the ground where those tombs were stayed sealed and untouched for over 3,000 years. The Chitala volcano is what's called an ash cone volcano. Basically, it looks like a classic volcano shape anyone would draw, round at the bottom and rising into a cone. It's about 1,000 feet tall with pretty steep sides, like walking up a hill that tilts about 30 to 40 degrees, which is definitely not an easy climb. Scientists believe Chitala erupted sometime between 245 and 315 CE, based on radiocarbon dating. When it blew, it wasn't a small event. It completely changed the landscape. Lava spread out and formed what we now call the Pedregal de San Angel lava fields, covering a huge area south of modern-day Mexico City. Imagine a thick, slow-moving wave of molten rock turning everything in its path into solid stone. One of the biggest victims of this eruption was Quiquilco, which was once a major and advanced city in Mesoamerica. The lava literally buried it, freezing it in time under layers of rock. After that, the people who lived there had to leave and spread out to other regions. On the bright side, this movement of people, kind of like a forced migration, helped spread their culture across central Mexico. It may even have influenced the development of nearby cities, like Teotihuacan. Sometime later, it became one of the most powerful urban centers in the region. But this story has a twist. Not all scientists agree on the timing. Some think that a series of big eruptions and the destruction of Quiquilco might have actually started earlier, around the 1st century BCE. So, depending on which history you look at, this disaster either happened a bit later in Roman times or even earlier, back when ancient civilizations in Mexico were still developing. Either way, it was a catastrophic event that reshaped both the land and the lives of the people living there. But let's get back to the tombs. They aren't huge. Most are about 3 to 6.5 feet wide and up to 5 feet tall. Picture something about the size of a small closet or a big storage bin you could crouch inside. Archaeologists call them bell tombs because of that rounded bottle-like shape. This style isn't unique to just one place. We've found similar tombs across different parts of Mexico. It means people must have shared their ideas, like trends spreading between regions today. Another curious thing is that this wasn't a one-time burial site. The team found later burials too, which means people kept coming back to that spot for generations. It was a place that remained important to a community for hundreds of years. Inside the tombs, archaeologists found offerings buried with those who had passed away. There were tools made from deer antlers, a cup, and small female figurines. They were probably personal items or symbolic gifts, similar to how people today might leave flowers or meaningful objects at a grave. All those items have been moved to the National Museum of History for careful study. Experts use them to figure out more about how those people lived. Luckily, this isn't the only discovery in the area. Construction work around Zapotec Park has been turning up all kinds of history lately. In fact, not long before this, archaeologists even found a 16th century cemetery from less than 100 years after the fall of the Aztec Empire after the Spanish conquest. A perfectly carved vertical hole hidden deep in the North Caucasus Mountains drops into the earth like someone drilled straight toward the planet's core. Some people even compare the shaft to internal passages inside the Egyptian pyramids. Could there really be a connection between them? So the public learned about this mystery cave thanks to a local cave enthusiast who was hiking in the North Caucasus in 2011. The rugged slopes of the Kara Hora mountain, with glacier-carved valleys and cliffs that have stood there against all sorts of weather for thousands of years, seem to be a perfect place if you want to hide something. And that's where Shemakov found something that looked like an entrance to an underground cave. He invited a team of cavers, and together they went down the shaft. At first, they were sure it was a geological formation, but the deeper they descended, the more it looked like something carefully built by humans. There were massive stone blocks that seemed fitted together so tightly that you couldn't push a knife blade between them. Some sources also say the shaft drops almost perfectly vertical, and its walls look polished, as if giant machinery smoothed them long before modern tools existed. But in reality, this smooth appearance results from natural geological fractures. What's really weird are openings resembling ventilation channels. These passages seem designed to move air through the structure. Natural caves rarely organize airflow this cleanly. That detail alone makes researchers argue whether someone designed and built all this intentionally. And if someone did build it on purpose, it would have to be one really advanced civilization. Some people said Shemakov described his discovery in every detail in his diary. But even if it really existed, it was lost. So we'll never know what was in it. In fact, we know so little about this man, and his discovery wasn't mentioned a lot on TV or elsewhere, that some people even questioned if he existed at all. Or maybe he saw something down there he shouldn't have seen. And there's no way to double-check, as he was hit by a car and passed away just 4 years after the discovery. This tragedy fueled even more rumors, speculation, and conspiracy theories. Geologists are trying to find a more logical explanation for this shaft, of course. The Caucasus Mountains are part of a massive chain called the Alpide Belt, which stretches all the way from southeastern Europe right into Asia. The Caucasus formed as a result of a tectonic plate collision. All these massive plates are still restless and constantly pushing against each other today. So the entire region gets hit with strong earthquakes on a regular basis. Plus, water, pressure, and chemical reactions can carve vertical shafts over millions of years. Underground rivers dissolve softer rock, and harder layers remain smooth, eventually forming deep chimneys. But erosion usually creates randomness, and Kara Hora has symmetry, angles, and fitted stone features that resemble architecture more than accident. Now, getting inside the shaft is still extremely dangerous. You'd have to face sheer drops, unstable ledges, and oxygen levels that thin out deeper underground. Twisting tunnels make it super tricky to find your way, and locals warn that some of the first explorers who entered never returned. Luckily, modern teams can use ground-penetrating radar and remote sensors instead of human descent to study the shaft. With every new scan, researchers find more voids that are still unreachable. Meanwhile, Kara Hora has interesting neighbors. For example, Verovkina Cave, currently the second deepest known cave on the planet. This monster drops nearly 1.5 miles straight down, deeper than 4 Empire State Buildings stacked end to end. Explorers descend through freezing waterfalls, razor-sharp rock corridors, and vertical pits that swallow light completely. Temperatures here hover just above freezing, and underground rivers roar through darkness nobody saw until recently. If you dare reach the bottom, prepare for a journey that will last weeks of staged camps, ropes stretching thousands of feet, and absolute trust in teammates. One mistake down there means you'll be gone for good. Veryovkina constantly floods and reshapes itself year after year, so cavers have to deal with flood pulses all the time. Water cuts deeper into the limestone rock and expands chambers slowly but surely, and then, because of the volume, suddenly bursts through cave openings. But this doesn't stop scientists from going down there to measure oxygen, airflow, and mineral growth to understand how caves evolve over geologic time. And that's how explorers discover strange microbial life that somehow survives without sunlight and feeds on minerals instead of plants. These ecosystems resemble conditions scientists expect beneath icy moons like Europa or Enceladus. This means the cave could be a great training ground for future space exploration. But before we head to space, let's check out another super interesting cave system, this time in northern Spain. There's a chamber there which scientists call Pit of Bones. Explorers have to trek into a pitch-black underground maze to squeeze through a narrow shaft that suddenly drops straight down for 42 feet. At the bottom of that geological trap, you slide down a steep stone ramp into a cramped, muddy chamber that holds the largest and oldest collection of early human fossils ever discovered. It's a biological time capsule with the remains of at least 28 ancient humans, frozen long before modern history even began. Explorers also found over 6,500 fossil fragments mixed with the remains of at least 166 Ice Age cave bears, lions, wolves, and foxes that probably fell down the shaft by accident. But the human bones are a massive mystery because they seem to have ended up down there much earlier than the animals. Who these people actually were is still a huge debate. When researchers looked closer at their skulls and jaws, they noticed strong, super early Neanderthal traits. Then things got even crazier when scientists miraculously extracted mitochondrial DNA from those ancient bones. It linked these individuals not only to early Neanderthals, but also to the Denisovans, a mysterious group of ancient humans found thousands of miles away in Siberia. It proves our ancestors were moving and mixing in ways far more complicated than anyone ever guessed. The drama doesn't stop at genetics, though. This dark cave might actually hold the world's first assassination mystery and its earliest funeral. Out of thousands of bones, archaeologists found absolutely no everyday tools or food waste, except for a single, carefully crafted quartzite hand axe they nicknamed Excalibur. Because of this, some researchers think the group intentionally lowered their deceased down the shaft with the axe as a ritual. It was probably a way to show compassion hundreds of thousands of years before we thought possible. At the same time, one of the skulls shows two identical lethal fractures that look exactly like intentional blows. To get the exact timeline for all this prehistoric drama, scientists use cutting-edge tech like electron spin resonance and uranium series dating, and finally locked down that is 430,000 years old. Now, let's jump across the world to another geological giant, Devil's Tower in Wyoming. The formation shoots nearly 900 feet above the surrounding land. Its surface has long vertical columns, and it looks like some careful hands carved them. But geologists explain the structure formed when molten rock pushed upwards underground and cooled slowly. As the rock cooled, it turned into hexagonal columns, similar to how drying mud splits into patterns, just scaled up to impossible size. Erosion later removed the softer surrounding rock and left the hardened core unprotected. Local tribes thought the tower was sacred and made up stories about giant bears clawing the stone during mythical hunts. Now, scientists agree on much of its volcanic origin, but debates continue about whether magma ever reached the surface or hardened entirely underground. Even after more than a century of study, Devil's Tower still has its mysteries. When you connect all these places, engineered shafts, endless caves, and underground ecosystem, one thing becomes clear. Earth hides entire worlds beneath our feet, and we've barely scratched the surface.